Bienvenue à Vox Terra. I want to share with you an underreported, underemphasized voice that's calling for negotiations with Russia, and by the way, is also warned against one-sided narratives against China as well. So for this, I'm going to share with you two interviews from Jeffrey Sachs that I heard both on Democracy Now!, one in August, one recently in December. Let me just list with you some of Jeffrey Sachs's credentials and why someone like this would be getting ignored by the media. Sachs is the director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University, president of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. He has served as advisor to 3 UN Secretaries General and has been an economic advisor to both Poland and the Soviet Union, as well as Russia in its first 2 years of independence. So this man has a long history in the region, a lot of expertise, a lot of credentials, and really interesting, like me, he's both concerned about sustainability and peace. And to me, the two issues are intertwined, maybe not in your head, but in mine there. I don't see how you're going to get to a sustainable green planet focused on the long-term survival of our species when all media narratives are just one-sided and getting our public revved up for war. And I've said before, I think the reason why voices like his get underemphasized, underreported, is just due to these connections between our media and some of these large established industries. And not to demonize them, but you really got to point it out. And the two big ones I'm thinking about, and apologies if you work in either of these ones, are defense and fossil fuel petrochemicals. So remember, your starting point is there used to be a Soviet Union, and that Soviet Union, most everything was publicly owned, or at least the big means of production, as Karl Marx would have put it. Those means of production were publicly owned. Well, after decades of pressure, Cold War, hot war, elements within that society decided to crack it open, go along with our, in quotes, agenda, privatize the whole thing, create really wealthy people, really poor people, allow for all sorts of international business interests to come in, organized crime emerged again, and ethnic conflict just spilled over out into the open. Well, as a lot of commentators have pointed out and underemphasized, part of the quid pro quo for this privatization of the Soviet Union, its dismantling, its disbanding, was going to be that NATO wouldn't keep expanding. At least that's what Secretary of State James Baker seemed to imply and Gorbachev seemed to understand. Well, also in addition, Sachs pointed out that there was a lot of economic calamity within those former Soviet republics. And Sachs, in his role as advisor, somehow was instrumental in getting through a stabilization fund, which helped Poland with its transition. But when he called for the same treatment for Russia, no such help was forthcoming. I believe I remember him saying something like some official from the U.S. administration just looked at him blankly when he suggested, let's get a stabilization fund for Russia. So the message that sends is, oi, thanks a lot for privatizing Russia, now sod off. Right? I mean, they cracked it open, privatized it, what we in quotes want, and now no, you're on your own, buddy. Okay, so you're on your own, pal. Thanks for privatizing. We're not going to expand NATO, but guess what? We are gonna. Well, here's what happened there. Now, earlier shows I shared with an article, there was major lobbying for the defense industry to keep expanding NATO, even though it didn't seem necessary after the breakup collapse of the Soviet Union. So first of all, the Russian people are now on their own with their new private economy, not getting much cooperation from the so-called West like they were thinking they were going to, or maybe would have hoped for. Now, Sachs mentioned that NATO expansion up towards Ukraine and Georgia, which are big red lines for Russia, that was first put on the table by George W. Bush and was pushed by the neocons. Now, the neocon movement was another really underemphasized thing in American history and still with us today. And that was the movement that largely was responsible for pushing the Bush administration towards invading Iraq. And as I've read in other articles, that movement also has its ties to the defense industry, at least. I believe petrochemical as well. But yet that movement is just always in the deep background of our media, allowing for this one-sided narrative to just churn forward. So at the height of their power and influence, when Bush W. proposed expanding NATO further to Ukraine, to Georgia, according to Sachs, Putin said explicitly, if NATO expands its borders, they would retake Crimea. Now, Crimea is a part of Ukraine, which has sort of historically gone between Russia and Ukraine, is my impression. Now, Sachs points out some underreported history of that whole region. Well, Crimea is a peninsula jutting out into the Black Sea. And according to Sachs, it's been, quote, consequential for Russia's economic and foreign policy and military security since 1783. Well, that's a long history that is not being told to us or not being emphasized. Then it was only in 1954, when there was still a Soviet Union, that Nikita Khrushchev transferred Crimea to Ukraine. But remember, those were really not independent nations. They were part of a union of Soviet socialist republics. And interestingly, the word Soviet, I believe, if it was translated, actually means workers' councils. But for some reason, that was always left untranslated, maybe to make it sound more foreign. Then keep in mind, too, really underemphasized, not just this constant push to expand NATO, but also the 2014 coup in Russia, or in Ukraine. So in Ukraine back in 2014 or pre-2014, that time period, there was an elected government that was, by the way our media depicted it, as I remember at the time, was like friendlier with Russia. Well, our media sort of portrayed them as corrupt and this kind of thing, and then there was this, portrayed it as a wonderful uprising against them, overthrowing them in a coup, which then appeared supported by our government, and that new government was acknowledged by our government. But underemphasized even then is that elements to overthrow that elected government that was friendlier with Russia were racialist or ethnicist elements, like something called the Azov Battalion. But it's all there in the news media, just kind of underemphasized. And that should really give people who think of themselves as liberal or left, who are sort of cheering on this like tough stance towards Russia and non-negotiation, pause. Because what are you really getting sucked into here? You may not really know. And to me, that coup says to Russia, if I was there, or if you were like a Russian patriot, for lack of a better word, it says, sorry, Russia, if you tough beans, you can't win by any means. You get a friendly government, we'll coup them. And we're expanding NATO, by the way, pal. So then following this coup, Russia invaded and took back Ukraine, or took back Crimea. That was during the Obama administration. Now, coming to today, back to the NATO expansion, well, Sachs claims this has been a central issue for Russia from the beginning. And he points out that ever since George W. Bush put that expansion, to Ukraine and Georgia on the table, you've had neocons promoting it for the past 14 years, including within the Biden administration. And here he cites someone named Victoria Nuland as what he calls the neocon in chief. So therefore, right up till 2021, Sachs points out Biden would not negotiate on the NATO issue. And here I've heard a lot of commentators in the background, but just draw an analogy to the Cuban Missile Crisis situation. Only this time, Russia is in the US's position. When the Soviet Union put nuclear missiles in Cuba, John Kennedy threatened to invade Cuba. Well, there was some of the behind-the-scenes negotiations. The U.S. took missiles out of Turkey, if I've got that part correct. And then the Soviet Union took missiles out of Cuba. The U.S. did not invade Cuba. So then, Sachs points out, underemphasized in the news again, is that after Russia invaded, it looked like Turkey was pretty close to brokering some kind of a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia. Ukraine walked away from that. Now, a lot of commentators point out that there was a lot of bellicose statements made from England, the UK, rather, kind of encouraging Ukraine to keep resisting. So people feel that that's what gave them that encouragement to keep on, to battle rather than negotiate, was just these unlimited supplies of arms coming in. And think of all the billions of dollars we've been sending and spending on this effort. And if you try to get billions of dollars to transition towards a less toxic, less polluting economy, what would people say to that? But billions of dollars for a war, no problem. Or how about billions of dollars to transition our healthcare system? Now, Sachs also points out that Ukraine itself has some ethnic divisions within it. There are large ethnically Russian populations there, at least along the eastern side, and the western side is more non-ethnically Russian, more Ukrainian. Now, just flip some arguments around in your head, and that's helpful if you want to get to a more peaceful world, because if you don't do that, you're not going to get there. What if after we had invaded Iraq, there was just billions of dollars funneling in to the embattled Ba'athist government led by Saddam Hussein, just billions of dollars and really high-tech, excellent weaponry and great training being given to them to resist our invasion? How would things have turned out differently? Well, that brings me now to the brutality of the Russian invasion. It's a horror show, okay? No doubt about it, it's a horror show, and that should be highlighted and condemned. But what also should be highlighted is how does almost any nation behave when their war is going badly. And here we get to the Bible saying, look at the mote in thine own eye. You really need that introspection if you want to get to peace. This isn't about disliking your own country or anything of that nature. It's about getting to peace and looking at your own sins, if you will. So in Iraq, turned out to be no cakewalk. They put up a pretty stiff fight there. You had the Abu Ghraib prison system where I remember there was torture light, or just torture if you want to call it that, which included sexual humiliation of captured Iraqis. This is by our side, but forgotten now. And then also there was some type of horror show at Fallujah when we besieged Fallujah. But again, these things are kind of forgotten. And then another war that really wasn't going well for us was the Vietnam War, where we sent in troops to Vietnam to bolster the government in the South. And there was something called the My Lai Massacre. And I also spoke with people who were in the Vietnam War who told me some of the things they did. One man told me they had a saying. Okay, this is a man who served in the war. He said they had a saying, what goes in the bush stays in the bush. Meaning what they do in those little villages in the jungle, it stays there. And I asked him what they did there, and I'm not going to repeat it here. My point is, and we're going to keep getting back to war again and again if you don't get past these really one-sided narratives. Look at the mote in thine own eye, or the flaws on our side, how we have helped foment the chaos. And we need to support international treaties and the United Nations, that kind of thing. Because look, this planet is heating and destabilizing. You can't keep on resolving all of your, quote, problems with war like this. But not just that. Are they, to what extent do these wars actually just represent competing financial interests? And if you buy into the narrative that, hey, that's our side, that's how the world works, we got to defend our own here, we got to defend our own fossil fuel industry, we need to bolster our own defense industry, and we need to be the ones making the sales, not Russia or China. It's got to be coming from us. Well, I wouldn't buy into it that easily, because first of all, you want to think, what kind of world do you want to live in? And second, always go back to the height of the British Empire. Height of the British Empire, grinding poverty in the streets of London. Meaning, no matter how wealthy and powerful your country gets, that's not going to mean the average people are going to benefit. Well, I hope you found this analysis helpful, interesting. You become a subscriber, you click the notification bell, you're donating at Patreon. And until next time, and as always, thank you, Bella Grissi, Environmental Coffee House, my two patrons at Patreon. And as always, until next time, peace be with you.